You're listening to Frontier Matters, the podcast from 1914 Reader. Join us as we dive into bold conversations on growth and change in the frontier economies of the world.
Our guest today is a Nigerian-born philosopher who asks what changes when we take African agency seriously in how we tell the story of modernity, colonialism, and democracy. Now professor of African political thought at Cornell University's Africana Studies and Research Center, he works to expand philosophy's African reach and make the discipline speak more directly to African students. His work, which has won the Frantz Fanon Book Award, argues that Africans were already building modern institutions and that colonial rule interrupted rather than invented those projects. He has also argued that modernity is not Western property, but a human inheritance Africans can claim and remake. He challenges decolonization rhetoric when it obscures rather than centers African thoughts and effort. Today, his work ranges from a major project on modern African political philosophy and late transitions to modernity in countries like Nigeria and Turkey, to a book asking whether the United States needs a Truth and Reconciliation Commission, always returning to questions of justice, institution, and human dignity. Professor Olúfẹ Táíwò, welcome to Frontier Matters.
Thank you very much, Toby and Faye. It's good to meet you both, and thanks for inviting me.
So I'll just start off. In your book, Africa Must Be Modern, you argue that there's nothing that is wrong with Africa at the present time that a serious engagement with and acceptance of modernity cannot solve, and that Africa must be modern, now, not tomorrow, not in the near future. For a general audience, could you outline what you mean by modernity in this context and why you are convinced that it holds the key to solving Africa's challenges? What are the core aspects of modern life or society that you believe Africa needs to embrace most urgently?
Thank you very much. You couldn't have chosen a better intro than that. When I was finishing How Colonialism Preempted Modernity in Africa, when I was writing the introduction, I could not escape having to distill what I take modernity to be. And the good part, I say this to my students these days, is that since the book was published, no one has challenged that account that I gave of what modernity is. And this, of course, has come from my training in what people want to call Western philosophy, which, as you saw in the book, I do own. I'm a Westerner. There's no doubt about it. So coming from Hegel, from Habermas, Charles Taylor, and going all the way back to the Enlightenment, which is my ken, part of what I find interesting is that since I finished the book and I've continued to deepen my work on modernity, I have really had some very good engagements with people who challenge, who want to talk about multiple modernities, Asian modernity. And I'll say to them, first, on the point of logic, if all modernities do not share something in common, in virtue of which we take each to be an instance of that general kind, then the word modernity has no meaning. And if that is the case, then we have to know what exactly that is that they all share in common. I think part of the problem is, just as I wrote in Against Decolonization, because people have their brains eaten by identity concerns, to acknowledge that they are borrowing something from elsewhere is almost as if Africa never had anything. And that turns Africa into non-humans. Every civilization borrows, I remind people English is the most creolized language ever in the world. And I don't think the English have ever apologized to anybody. I didn't say the British, because British is not a language.
Yeah.
And you know how small England is compared, even in the island that make up that country called the United Kingdom. Do you see any anxiety on their part that they have borrowed so much from Hindi, from Sanskrit, from everywhere? And every year now, they add new words to the language, including 4 or 5 years ago, when they added 30 and 10 of them are Yoruba words. So now when you go into the OED, you're going to find Owambe. It's not an English word. Did you find any anxiety on their part? Heck no, because that's what humanity does. So modernity, I argue, originated in Europe. Let's be very clear. Out of the Enlightenment. But it was not fully constituted there. And as it went into the world, people started adapting it in their different ways. But what it is they're adapting has what I call 3 core tenets. The first is straight out of philosophy. It's called the principle of subjectivity. Now, we don't need to be bombastic, which I love to be, So, simply put, that is what is treated in Africa Must Be Modern as individualism. Okay? And when I was finishing the book, I had not even come to the point where I was persuaded that individualism was central to modernity. Now I don't have any hesitation. The second, coming out of the Enlightenment, is the centrality of reason. And reason with a big R, not small. Reason with a small r is what makes us human. It's what separates us from the animals. It's what, as the Greeks would say, brings us closer to the gods. That's the intellect and all that. But modernity, coming out of the Enlightenment, insisted that what we are now going to use to make sense of the world inside us, the world outside us, our own nature and everything else, is reason. That's because the Enlightenment overthrew the 3 sources of validation of knowledge in the past, which were revelation, tradition, and authority. And that's how the scientific revolution grew out of that centrality of reason. So if you say that you have Egbe, then you have to be able to show that Egbe is replicable in China. If it is not replicable, if it cannot be duplicated, it's sorcery. That's what science does. It does not mean that science does everything, but that is its calling card. And you then find how mathematics and everything, so that all the things that just used to be practices that people had, people started looking for the principle behind them. That's how magic was overthrown. That's how sorcery was overthrown. Sorcery is not the exclusive preserve of any human being. Go back and read your Macbeth. Okay? Go back and read your Julius Caesar. Divination was part of Greek religion, Roman religion. They had all those days where they offered all those sacrifices, the Aztecs, the Mayans. So don't believe all this nonsense, about this, African that. So the third core tenet is the idea of progress. And that is tied to what I call the open future, because it's also a horizon of time. Okay? And I have a less endearing name for that particular tenet. You know what I call it? A lunatic obsession with novelty. So that's the reason why in the modern age, it's all about the new. In all these societies where I live, they don't repair things because they are broken. Actually, when they are broken, they are thrown out. They repair things because they are looking old. So you see them, upgrading malls, repainting, and all that. And the best place where you see this on an everyday basis is in advertising. New and improved. Think of that phrase. And when you go to look, it's only the packaging. It's still the same toothpaste that you are buying. But now they give it some fancy name. And you say you're getting something new. So it was my attempt to then ask if Africa were to take this element seriously on a popular level, what would that look like? So that's why I wrote Africa Must Be Modern. And each chapter of the book actually goes to various elements. So the way I broke them down in Africa Must Be Modern is, so you have individualism. But out of that principle of subjectivity is exactly where you have the rule of law, the respect for the individual, the whole business that nobody should be under a government in the constitution of which he or she has not had a hand. It's called the principle of governance by consent. That is peculiarly modern. The modern age is also the first time that those who make laws are themselves subject to the laws they have made. These are all very specific. They are historical. They are not eternal. And they are not coming, out of the blood of white people. In fact, for some of my Black students who always want, I'll show you. You see the title of that book?
Pioneers of the Black Atlantis. Yeah.
But look at the subtitle, please.
Five slave narratives from the Enlightenment.
Thank you. So if black people were already writing part of the Enlightenment, how then does the Enlightenment become a white thing? And if you want to say it's a European thing, which it was, since when did Europe become totally white? Europe has never been white. It always had Jews. It always had blacks. It always had other people from Asia. People forget Europe is Eurasia. So where does all these attachments come from? So that's what I mean. And when you look at Africa Must Be Modern, that's why you have a chapter called The Knowledge Society and Its Rewards, because modern society is a knowledge society. And then where I have process, not outcome, that's where the whole business of rules. Again, the modern age is the first time in human history where rules were turned into gods. And they inconvenience everybody the same way. And they are totally depersonalized. So that's why you need an absolutely independent judiciary for Europe to run a modern economy. And the final chapter on Against Limits, that is the idea of progress run riot. And you can see how optimistic I am when I said I like to see my hometown, Ibadan, have an airport where the person checking your passport when you come in is a Bosnian Herzegovinian who has moved there because they can live better. Did I answer your question?
Yep.
So those are the three core tenets. The principle of subjectivity, which is sociologically called individualism, the centrality of reason, and the open future.
I must confess that I hope I'm not getting ahead of myself, that I've been a big fan of your work for a very long time. I've gifted so many copies of Africa Must Be Modern, particularly. And I think that, in my opinion, it should be a required reading in our schools, the same way we read Things Fall Apart and all the rest. I hope we get there someday. So to follow up on Fi's question, you also argue that at this moment, what ails modernity matters less for Africa than what recommends it. How would you explain to a skeptical young African why the risks and pathologies associated with modernity are still worth embracing, and what you'd see as the non-negotiable benefits?
Oh, thank you very much. And thanks for your very kind words. Don't make an old man cry, okay? I really appreciate that. You wouldn't know how touched I am by what you just said. So here's the deal. Look at what has happened recently. Earlier this year, I hope you all followed what happened in South Korea, where their former president declared martial law.
Yeah.
Because he was not having his way with parliament. What did South Korea do? The parliamentarians jumped the fence because they know that if those jokers were to take over the parliament, it would be almost impossible for them to do anything. They jumped the fence to get inside the parliament to say that's illegal. And what did ordinary Koreans do? They came out in their thousands and clogged all the streets. They didn't burn any place. Okay? The police didn't come out shooting at anybody. But why is South Korea so instrumental in this sense? Because South Korea made a deliberate decision to become Western. Do you know, they even set themselves a benchmark. Did you know what their benchmark was? To become members of the OECD, which is the club of the big boys, of the big economies, the advanced countries. And they set a timetable for it. They missed their target by 2 years. But why they missed the target is what is instructive. Every member of the OECD must set aside 0.7% of its GDP as foreign aid. So South Korea did not meet that threshold, and that's what led to the 2 years, extra to the timetable that they set for themselves. Now, let me ask you, who is South Korea giving foreign aid to now?
African countries, no doubt.
Meanwhile, this is South Korea that has no resources. They have only 3 natural resources. You want to know what they are? Iron ore, hello aja okuta, okay? Tungsten, and fish. That's it. And 64% of the country is uninhabitable because it's all rocks. But they decided that they were tired of being the footmat of the world and went at it with gusto. But it's not the material things that they got. UAE now has the material things. Qatar has the material things. But after South Korea went through authoritarian rule for much of its history after the Second World War and the Korean War, they decided to go the way of democracy to complement the material structures that they had got. Okay? Do you know their last ruler extorted the incoming parliament to give them amnesty? 3 parliaments later, the amnesties were overthrown and 3 of the last rulers of South Korea went to jail. Now, Africa remains the only continent where the military destroyed the continent and no one has paid any price except Idris Deby, who was tried in Senegal. Obasanjo is still walking the streets. People think Babangida is a statesman. They have never explained, how Abiola died. And now you find young people praising the thugs in uniform in Burkina Faso. Meanwhile, compare Myanmar. After 2008, and they got democratic regime, even though it was still commanded by the military and all that. In 2022, when the military decided to go back, people said, So Myanmar is in civil war now, and the military does not even control up to 60% of the country because people say, we're not going back there. So what I'm saying is, what recommends modernity is that focus on the individual and the dignity of the littlest amongst us. And you never, repeat, never abridge that dignity, that interest of that small individual for the betterment of the society. You have to have very grave reasons for you to be able to do that. And I am about human dignity, which does not exercise Africa. Forget all the institutional things that I've just explained to you. Human dignity, and I'm not alone. I just published a paper on Cabral's humanism. I've just finished another paper on Soyinka's humanism. Okay? And when you look at our most important thinkers and writers, Africa's most important political philosopher of the last century was also the most modern. And you all know him, but you're not thinking, if I ask you to guess, it's Obafemi Awolowo, period. Not Nyerere, not Nkrumah, Obafemi Awolowo. I hope I answered your question.
Yeah.
It's the dignity. And from that, you are able to release the energies of people, which was what South Korea did. Nigeria started negotiating for Ajaokuta at the same time that the same institutions of the West told South Korea it did not have the economy to support a steel industry. They went to build it anyway. It's called POSCO. It's probably the 4th largest steel industry in the world. Where is Ajaokuta? We started at the same time. And finally, name the country in the world that has gone on the modern path that is not better than any country in Africa. Name one.
Food for thought.
Just one. So.
We don't want to be too harsh on Africa, but I think it's pretty clear that, African countries have, we've let ourselves down, to put it mildly. Let's put it that way. Like you said, modernity is as African as it is Western. So whatever is stopping us from embarking on that path is down to ourselves and no one else, really.
And let me just add one more point. The blueprint of China's journey in the last 40 years that has brought it to where it is now, you know what they called it? The 4 modernizations. China.
Yeah.
And you Africans go, that's all Western. We have to find African solutions to African problems, which of course means that you think Africans are not normal human beings. Why is it that other solutions that work for other human beings don't work for Africans?
True. Very true.
All right. Let me ask a question on colonialism, right? So you write that the genealogy of modernity in Africa predated colonialism, something you've already said as well. Yeah. And you've obviously implied that Africans were already engaged with modern ideas and institutions before European rule. So can you explain, maybe kind of like how colonialism might have actually derailed or preempted Africa's path to modernity rather than accelerated it. What were Africans doing in terms of social or political change before colonial conquest? How did colonial policies interrupt those developments?
Thank you. I'll give you just two examples, just two, which is a chapter in how colonialism. Between 1868 and 1871, the Fanti people in Ghana, their kings got together, and their educated folks and all that. And I will take you back to the origins of that. And they wrote themselves a constitution. They wrote and formally adopted a constitution. Okay? So it's called the Fanti Confederacy. And that movement was led by those that I call the graduates of the Missionary School of Modernity. So the modernity that I'm talking about was the modernity for which Christianity was the vector. And the leader, not spiritual, intellectual leader of that movement was none other than Samuel Ajayi Crowther.
Yeah.
Okay? Because that first cohort of missionaries in the early 19th century, coming after the abolition, the humanitarian movement and all that, wanted to restore African dignity. And they were led by Africans. I studied history at Ife. All the books I read then, when I started doing this work, I was reading them again, and then, oops. So when you're reading the journals of Samuel Ajayi Crowther, you're going to find things like, and Peter something, in brackets, Nupe. So I said, oops. So when you see so-called English-looking names,
yeah,
many of them were Africans who had converted. 75 to 80% of those mission stations were run by Africans. And all they wanted to do was to transform their societies along modern lines, including what I just said, governance by consent. So what did the Fanti do in that constitution? They said they were going to preserve their kings and all that. But they were now going to create an executive arm that will be led by educated elite. They knew that Ade Ajayi wrote about.
Mm.
So do you know what they were going to call the head of that confederacy? King President. I'm not making it up. If you want, if you send me your email, I have your email, I will send you the constitution. They wrote it. And they had in view in future that all positions would become elective. So they were going to get rid of hereditary rule and all that. Okay? They had room to create a new judiciary. Most importantly, they put in place in that constitution a process of taxation. Do you know what the British governor in their area did? And they had not even come under British rule completely by then. You know what the British governor did after they sent him the constitution? He put all of them in jail. Mm. The people who were saying, oh, we like what you guys do, we want it for ourselves, they put them in jail. That's where the career of Lugard came in Nigeria. Indirect rule was the reversal of that process. That's where you have the second experiment, which was right there in Nigeria. It's called Abeokuta, Egba United Board of Management. What did Lugard call them when he amalgamated Nigeria in 1914? He called the Egba United Government, which was what they called it by then, and eyesore, and dissolved them. Egba United Government were the first to have street lights, postage stamps. They had their own border posts. Those were the constitutional experiments that I discussed. There were others. So you have all these thinkers led by James Africanus Bill Horton. So all this was happening until 1861 when they took over Lagos. And until 1884-85, the Berlin West Africa Conference, when they started divvying up Africa and imposing. So what did they do after they started imposing the military administrators who now took over? All those experiments were delegitimized. And all those who wanted Africa to be modern, they were dismissed as European wannabes, troublemakers who did not really represent their people. So in Western Nigeria, where the Obas were already on the run as a result of the century of civil wars that ended in 1893, they started restoring them, giving them power that they had lost. The North was the worst, where Lugard wrote in political memoranda, "We know these emirs and other are no good sons of bitches, but we need them to pacify the natives." Started restoring to them powers they had lost, and places in the North, especially the Middle Belt, where they were never able to subdue the people. Welcome to Southern Kaduna, welcome to Benue and all that. Lugard started putting all those people under emirs, under indirect rule. That's how modernity was subverted. And when the Alaafin of Oyo, remember it was still under colonial rule, Baba Adeyemi thought that he could jẹ ayé ìyà tó ń jẹ lábẹ́ àwọn òyìnbó. What did Awolowo do? He deposed him. We were not independent then. And did Awolowo wait until independence before putting in place the universal free primary education? No. Were the colonialists able to stop him? No. He had the idea, announced it in 1953, when he had just been changed to premier from leader of government business. And 55, the program was on. We've never looked back. That's what I mean.
I mean, deep stuff. You coined the term socio-cryonics to describe how colonial authorities try to cryopreserve African societies, freezing indigenous social structures in time under the guise of protecting tradition. I mean, like you just brilliantly explained. So sometimes the way I try to describe it when I look at the way we function today and our institutions is like, especially to your point on indirect rule, is like a maladaptive species that was, grown in the lab.
Thank you.
And it's so frustrating. What I want you to go deeper on, do we still see the legacy of this frozen development in African countries, especially the post-independence struggle with governance and development?
Yeah, we do. In fact, part of my problem is the tragedy of where the three of us come from, Western Nigeria, where we just continue to go back, instead of going forward the way we were supposed, to go forward. When I hear people now talking about, we should find a constitutional place for our traditional rulers, please. Oh, by the way, I did publish a pamphlet 4 years ago on can a liberal be a chief? Can a chief be a liberal? Do you guys know of that?
No.
I think I may have heard of that, actually.
You have to send us the links to all the papers we discussed in this episode, and we just put them up in the show notes.
Okay. Oh, no, this is a pamphlet. This is a book. And I will share with you some of the things that people don't think about, the tragedy of indirect rule. If you don't mind, we don't have traditional rulers anymore. The latest example is what just happened in Oyo with the new Alaafin. Okay? Do you know what we have? You cannot be a chief or whatever it is anywhere in Nigeria today without the Gazette. Lugard started that. 2, Lugard was the one who created the levels of first class, second class, third class, fourth class traditional rulers. 3, Lugard was the one who instituted the idea of staff of office.
Okay.
And the staff of office was actually to indicate the subordination of the so-called traditional ruler to the resident. So when some years ago, Wike, trashed the so-called traditional rulers in Rivers State, I said, you go around, you don't take your staff, that is exactly what makes you whatever it is. He knew what he was doing. Kosari Fimbe, that was the bloody truth. This is the failure of our scholars. This is my point. This is the failure. We need to move away from them. Yes, we should preserve them as cultural institutions, but they have no role whatsoever in the political governance of the country, of any part of the place. None whatsoever. That's what I mean by, the frozen institution, and it gets even more and more absurd every day. So when Ajimobi woke up one morning and said, every chief in Ibadan should be wearing crowns, the power of Gazette. And if you are not ready to wear crown, you cannot be Oba. The power of Gazette will mark a day and Ladoja lately. Okay? You find other ways in which these things have been frozen. Every time somebody says tradition versus modernity, please walk away from them. They don't know what they're talking about. Mm-hmm. That is where you see that social cryonics at work. And we have to preserve our traditional institutions. Africa must be the only place where nothing changes. Mm. Senegal no longer has chiefs. Guinea has no chiefs. Kenya has no chiefs. Tanzania has no chiefs. Zambia has no chiefs. Are they not African countries? But your people are now looking to even make that backward progress by asking for constitutional provision for chiefs. What for? Instead of solidifying democracy and making sure that no one is above the law. That's my point. It's a retrogressive move. Chiefs have no place in our future. That's one thing that Mandela did for them in South Africa. Yes, they still have some way, to accommodate them and all that, but not as part of administration. That's part of what led to crisis in KwaZulu-Natal. I wrote about it in the pamphlet.
Yeah.
I will send both of you a copy of the pamphlet each. What is coming to Nigeria, and I think I can get the person to bring it. It's not heavy, it's very small. So.
Oh, thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you. Right, that's a really good one. So I wanted to talk about knowledge, and I think this is one of my favorite parts of, your book and your work. So you describe many African universities as glorified diploma mills because they were founded on a colonial logic of manpower development rather than the pursuit of knowledge for its own sake. So you argue that we must support scholars studying quote unquote useless topics like fish psychology rather than demanding, so you say rather than demanding that they solve immediate practical problems like hunger. Now, I agree with you wholeheartedly on the pursuit of knowledge for its own sake. God knows, personally, I derive a lot of pleasure and satisfaction from knowing a lot of useless stuff, if you like, But how do you defend this investment in abstract knowledge societies to an African public that is currently navigating the ugliness of failing infrastructure, slums, hunger, who may then view such intellectual detachment as an unaffordable luxury?
Thank you. The failure lies squarely on our first, second, and third, and probably fourth, some might say third, generations of scholars in Nigeria, to be very, to just use Nigeria. Okay? Our teachers, many of whom I respect and love, and they know, did not serve us well. They never questioned that model of education, of knowledge production. And as I've been saying to many people, they were all afflicted with the worst forms of navel-gazing. It was about their careers, and it was even outwardly looking because it was about their getting recognition out here and so on. And that's why many of them, poetic justice, in the twilight of their years, ended up prostituting themselves in these places. Again, we look at a country like India, which is also an ex-colony. In the 60s, when they pioneered this whole business of NGOs and, and so on and so forth, that was how subaltern studies emerged from their strivings. That's how Indian scholars, in the 90s up till now became the teachers of modernity to the West. Homi Bhabha, Chakrabarti, all of them. If all that India had got, and again, Lugard is the person to go to here. Britain went to India to force India to be modern, whether or not Indians wanted to be. And the plan was to create a class of Indo-Saxons. Didn't they succeed? And they opened everything to them. By the time Lugard came to Africa, he wrote in Dual Mandate, we gave Indians an education of the intellect, quote unquote. It came back to bite us. Because of his racism towards Africans, he said because Africans are natural prevaricators, what we needed, according to him, was character education based on religion. Have we moved one path from that? All the universities you have in Nigeria right now, most of them just celebratory nonsense to, empty preachers who are all frauds. What do they tell you? Oh, we train moral graduates. But where is India now? India is sending spacecraft to the moon. Where's Nigeria now? We're getting deeper and deeper into what I call occultocracy. So, if those of us who are in the business, and trust me, intellectuals throughout history, we have always, that's why I call us prostitutes. We have always been paid to have leisure so that we can think and think forward, for our societies. The whole idea of knowledge for its own sake, especially in the modern age, that's where it came from. So they pay you money to have a year without teaching, without anything. They just put money in your pocket and say, go read your book and tell us something we don't know. Other countries have borrowed that model and they have used it very well. Let me give you one very interesting example about that. The French writer who won the Nobel Prize for Literature, who grew up in Onitsha and wrote that novel about Onitsha, Le Closeau. Do you know he was already part of the Institute for Translation at Ewa Women's University where I taught before he won the Nobel Prize? So why would South Korea, and this is a private university, it's one of the top universities, Ewa Women's University, why would they be spending so much money to bring a noted French writer to come and work with them in an Institute of Translation? What is the bread that is going to be produced from that encounter? So it's all about educating your public about the importance of things. But what are you going to find? All our vice chancellors say, oh yeah, we're training for STEM. STEM is their new thing now, And I always ask students, you look at STEM, what are the two bookmarks at the end of STEM? What's the first one? The S.
Science.
And what's the last one? The M.
Mathematics.
Thank you very much. Which part of that goes into industry? Directly. You see what I'm saying?
Yep.
You do science. Science is not technology. Science enables technology, clarifies technology. Our engineers, they sit in their offices. Yes, that's where engineers sit. These are the things that those who came before us failed to educate. So what I'm saying to you is, it does not mean that that job cannot be done. And we must not give up on it by then saying that, people have to feed. In fact, as you saw from the example of the fish psychology, okay, do we know what is underneath our feet in terms of our soil? In this small town where I am, where Cornell is, Lake Cayuga, that is the lake here. People here at Cornell University and at Ithaca College, which are the two main institutions here, the zoologists and so on and so forth, they know every species of weed that is inside that lake. So when something else brings a new species that is destroying that, they can arrest it immediately. There is no scholar in Nigeria who knows what is inside the Ogunpa. So how then are you going to be able to measure? They don't even know the volume of the river. You see how unimportant these issues are? They are like trivia. But when you go into them, you begin to see the dire consequences of not having that knowledge.
Yeah.
That's what I mean. And that's the reason why we have never been able to get our money bags Instead of spending their money getting chieftaincy titles, marrying more women, building houses they will never be able to occupy, and sending people on pilgrimage to Mecca, to give money to us to do useless things. This is what I mean. No, that job remains to be done. We cannot give up on it.
Yes.
UAE is now sending rockets to the moon and creating programs because they said, not just their boys, they said they want their young girls to see themselves as future scientists. This UAE, we are doing Sharia, cutting off hands, and destroying bottles of beer, and building more mosques. Come on. UAE is any less Islam than northern Nigeria is? Saudi Arabia is any less Islam than northern Nigeria is? This is how they are spending their money now. I hope I answered your question.
Yes, yeah.
On that one, for me, there is absolutely no compromise. I'll give you a different example. Look at Yoruba. I work on the internet and so on and so forth. But the real work that should be done, how many Yoruba graduates? I just did an op-ed, that was published in papers over that scrapping of mother tongue. And I said, yes, they should be scrapped.
I agree with you, by the way, as well, yeah.
Yes, we should stop lying to ourselves. How many scholarships do you give to people to study Yoruba? Daddy, I'm going to be studying Yoruba. What are you going to do with that? That's part of the whole thing about knowledge of its own sake. What are you going to do with that? Olúfẹ, you think I'm going to be supporting you for the rest of your life? This is what parents tell their children. And then the child will go and do law and then end up, following Portable. Come on. So what they blow dog and oh yeah, I went, yes, my dad wanted me to. I see all of them every day on Sunrise when they bring them as artist of the week. I study computer science because that's what my parents wanted me to do. But music has always been my thing. I sang in choir.
Everybody sang in choir.
Thank you very much. I follow these things because that's really how I see when you ask me these kinds of questions. I don't want to sound highfalutin. No, it's really about life.
Yeah.
You couldn't have been more right. Listening to you, my mind goes back to that Bertrand Russell's pamphlet in praise of idleness and the whole point of useless knowledge and what it does to a society, how it expands the mind, and the practical implications cannot really be overemphasized. One of my favorite channels to watch is Nat Geo World, and I desperately wish that National Geographic will film some of those episodes in Nigeria. We don't know what is in our forests.
Yeah.
Thank you.
We don't know what is in our seas.
Thank you.
And it always baffles me why this does not bother anybody. Right?
Thank you.
Why we just trudge along this way and we just accept things as it is.
You know why now, from what I'm saying, you have to look at your universities, because that whole education should be oozing out of us in the universities. So that way we inspire high school teachers, to leave field trips, when they're biology teachers, to take their children and say, oh, let us go to this lagoon, that is in this area. Let us go and study, and then the kids will get excited, say, oh, I found this thing crawling, We don't have any of that. So what that means is we don't expand our people's imagination. And imagination is everything. We think imagination is just for creative writing. Imagination is, when I'm walking around, right, I will just stop and look at a small, you see all those ceramic things that they use to insulate wires that are used for transmission, Somebody thought of that small thing, okay? And the material that is used to make it, to insulate, but it's clay, it's the same principle that you used to make mugs that you now use, but somebody thought that thing up. And it is from what they thought of that we then find, oh, we could adapt this. As I wrote in the book, Viagra did not come from any research on the dick. It came from research on blood circulation. By the way, Africa was the only continent where there was no basic research that was adapted to a COVID vaccine during the COVID crisis. Brazil came up with its own. Cuba came up with its own. India came up with its own. China came up with its own. And of course, Europe. Africa was the only continent where there was no institution that was doing any basic research that could have been adapted.
No latiferi.
And then we started, all these rich countries, they are doing vaccine, they are not sharing. We are beggars to the world.
Vaccine inequality.
No, it's disgusting. It's disgusting.
Let me pivot a bit to another subject that gets me really, really fired up because, again, as part of what we have taken for granted in this whole discourse around Africa is the issue of, I think you've already hit on that slogan, African solutions to African problems. And, you see the same thing in thinking about governance that, individualism cannot work here. We are a communal people, blah, 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 blah. So, and which is one thing you touched on in your manifesto, which you've talked about, the embrace of individualism as a principle of social ordering. This runs against the narrative that we are familiar with. So, I know that for someone that does what you do, it must feel like repeating yourself at this point. But this message really needs to get out. Why do you see individual rights and personal autonomy as so crucial to Africa's future and how we govern ourselves?
Thank you very much. You are seeing it right now in all those countries led by thugs in uniform, because that's what they are. They are all thugs in uniform. See what just happened in Guinea-Bissau. It wasn't long ago when Guinea-Bissau formed a country with Cape Verde, right? Cape Verde broke away and became a separate country. As of today, Cape Verde is one of only two African countries that have risen up to the level of middle-income countries. The second one is Mauritius. And Cape Verde did this with, when I said South Korea has 3 natural resources, Cape Verde does not have any. Rain does not even fall there. I think rain falls there 3 times a year. How did they become a middle-income country? Through tourism. And they don't have water. So all the water they use on all the islands are through desalination. They've just qualified for the World Cup. Hello. Now, look at the Guinea-Bissau that is the one that is quote-unquote more African. It's not a narco state. There's some lesson there. Meanwhile, every time people then talk about this communalism and so on and so forth, here's the problem. The individual is the discovery of the modern age. And think of all the things that people used to do. It used to be that if somebody transgressed in a village, the whole village would be sacked. That was how colonialism operated. If somebody commits an offense, they will go to the household and arrest everybody. Look at what that does to the dignity of all those that they arrested, who have not done anything. So under the legal system, that's why you have to establish a causal connection between the event and the person who did it. And not only do you have to just show that, maybe there's a connection, you have to show that if that person had not done what he or she did, the event that you are litigating would not have arisen. So you have to establish causality. So that way, you actually train people's agency to being able to choose and be responsible for what they have chosen. But when they now tell you that the government is formed by somebody who just woke up one morning in his useless khaki uniform and said, the something revolutionary council of the army have decided. What magic does wearing a military uniform add to you to make you a better administrator, for crying out loud? And when people started arguing with me and all that, I said to them, our politicians are you? I said, yes, but you choose them and you can remove them. So are you better off having somebody speak on your behalf and impose himself on you? Or you chose the wrong person the first time, then 4 years later, you toss them out. That dignity that this law that you are obeying, you are part maker of it because you put that person there and you can remove them at the next cycle. And you then think of all the other ways that the dignity of the individual does not. Think of disabled people in our societies. Every time I see anybody crawling on the street, my humanity is crawling on the street. I'm sorry. That's the way I've always been. It was not because I moved here. One thing I show people to Taban Drive will be, many of us, you are driving one small rural area and all that, and you see a sign, deaf person. You may have come from Mongolia, but once you get into that neighborhood, you have to change your driving to take account of the fact that somebody trying to cross may be that deaf person. You don't know who that deaf person is. But they put up that sign to make sure that even that one person does not run the risk of being run over because he or she cannot hear the honk of your car. That is how minute, how granular we get with this. You don't slap somebody because that turns you into judge and executor at the same time. That's why we have separation of powers. They have granular implication. And we love too much to just think that, we have to work with the community, and then they say, but we do allow under our culture for the individual. So I said, no. If the individual cannot stop you from doing something just for the sheer fact that they are not onto it, then you don't respect the individual. And in these societies that are very individualistic, it's very interesting. They find new ways of constituting community. It's not because they don't have community, but community is not something that is forced on you. And that's what happens with our families. You do anything for them, they don't cultivate you. That's disrespecting you. Ever before I ever left Nigeria, as a young guy, who just finished working, who went to work in the secretariat after my A-levels, I remember something that used to be written on our pay envelopes back in the day. Do you know the label they put on that envelope? Personal emolument. It was not family emolument. It has significance. So if I give you money, it's not because you're entitled to it. Don't extort me. So people know that you don't ask favors. But this is also the society that is the most generous on the face of the earth. But our communalist societies, what do those people do even after they steal the money? Do you feel their impact? That's the mentality that has to change. And you see how it operates, in the legal system, in social system, and all. You don't talk to anybody just anyhow. If I go anywhere here and I'm talking to the store clerk and I raise my voice, the person reserves the right not to serve me. Are human beings different anywhere else? No, they're not. Dignity should never be negotiable. There's nowhere in Africa where human dignity exercises us. That has to change. And again, those of us who pretend to be intellectuals, that is the job you give to us. How we socialize the future. How we talk to people in the classroom. My students know that. Some of the students that I taught in Nigeria, one of them became my colleague in Seattle. I taught him in his final year in Ife. So if I had been treating him like we do where we come from, go out. You don't talk to people like that. I did not have to come out here before I discovered that. One of my students that I taught when I was a graduate assistant, we are family now. In fact, she just wrote me yesterday that her father just passed. We have been together since our undergraduate years. That is what dignity does. It's not fear. It's love, born out of respect. I always tell people, I grew up in a culture where, by the time you worry about how am I going to say this to Bodai that he will not be annoyed, that it will not be as if I'm, being rude to him. You will have forgotten what you want to say to him. That's part of one of the ways in which it kills imagination.
Yeah.
No, if people speak out of turn, you can correct them gently. We all know when we, say something that we don't mean to say. That should not cause any anger. Just say, I really don't appreciate, what you just said. Then people learn not to say it again that way. They say, you are talking to me like that? I'm your father? Come on. It's violent. I'm sorry.
I remember I was saying something today, actually. I saw a news story today about a 60-year-old math professor in the US, and he's now gone to work for the startup of one of his students. She's just 24.
Yeah.
But she basically tried to get him to come there. They're trying to build a math kind of like AI company, and he's taking sabbatical from work to go and work for his student, so
Thank you.
Yeah, so that dignity bit is something that we, like you said, we don't really know how to do it. We've never really figured out to do it.
And that's again what I mean by it's part of the failure. I don't want to talk of the elite. It's a particular section of the elite because we are the ones who train the future. We train people. They pass through us. We model for people how things should be. It's a big responsibility. Just to joke about my initial encounter with you and all that. So I told, the people you said to, I said, no, you guys know me. Even if I'm going to say no, I owe them a reply. It's that simple. If somebody wrote you out of the blue, and all that, if you are not able to get to it and all, but you just don't treat people like, what are these ones looking for? No. I don't know you. So I cannot make any presumptions. But the fact that you reach out to me, especially in the way that you did and all that, come on. Simple courtesies. That's all I'm saying.
So let me ask another question now. So throughout your work, you're very optimistic. There's an unwavering optimism about modernity as Africa's path forward, even while recognizing that modernity and the societies that embody its core tenets are not without blemish, right? So you don't need to be perfect,
Talk of chattelization in this country of slavery.
Exactly.
It was at its highest at the same time that modernity was actually becoming, the way of dealing with the world.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. So you advise that Africa should stay clear of such pitfalls of modernity's darker sides, as it advances. Now, critics might still ask, so what about the downside of the Western model of modernity? Things like environmental degradation, social alienation, or the loss of cultural heritage, Are you concerned, for example, that rapid industrialization and individualism could introduce new problems even as they solve some problems, but they might bring in new ones? And second of all, how would you respond to those who fear that modernity might be a double-edged sword for Africa? Are there specific pitfalls that you are most wary of? And how can African nations preparing to modernize guard against them?
Okay, thank you. Let's be clear. Modernity, like other movements in history, epochs, is always a two-edged sword. Okay? So the question is, how do you handle the externalities, that come with it? So again, let me use South Korea. South Korea is part of the research I was doing, which I've not advanced now, on late transitions to modernity. That's why I went to live there. Soon after, I was going to go live in Turkey, and then all the crazy things began to happen in Turkey. So that's what delayed that, and all that. And then Japan, because people don't believe that Japan is a late transition to modernity. And this addresses the point you just raised in Faye. That's because people just think of Japan as a modern society, at the technological, modern and all that, but not at the sociological level. Okay? And the fact that Japan never made that transition at that level is part of why it is going through all the crises it is going through now. Falling population, aging population, and it is the country among the most advanced countries in the world industrially that has the least spending on social welfare, especially, childcare. So that's why women in Japan don't marry. because they know that when they marry, this is the crisis of Japanese sociology. I used to study it more, back in the 2000s and all that. And they have children, they have to get off the career track onto the mommy track because there's no childcare. So subsequent governments have been trying, but this new right-wing woman that they've got, I think is going to dismantle all that, But South Korea is experiencing the same thing. Do you know one ugly fact about South Korea right now? That's the country that has the highest rate of suicides among people in their 20s in the world. I don't sugarcoat any of this stuff. But South Korea now, this is where modernity becomes very, very crucial. Spends a lot of money studying these issues and then trying to find out how they are going to move the society. There's no going back to a previous time. Going back to a previous time is not even stagnation, it's regress because the rest of the world will move. Okay? So it is that whole knowledge part that then becomes important for them to start looking for ways to handle that. I've forgotten the country that I was, watching something about recently. It's Japan. I think it's Japan. So it's almost as if you can actually now rent people to come and hang out with you. So they will be like pretend cousins or uncles and all that, and they will come. Meanwhile, don't get me wrong, those who are trying to say, our communalism and so on and so forth, we do not take account of how much elder abuse goes on in our societies.
Yeah.
We do not take account of how much many old people are neglected because all their children are away. And we no longer live in those situations where people are always looking out for one another. Many of us now, especially in the expanding middle class, no matter how much it has shrunk, we live behind walls so that even our mothers have to inform us ahead of time if they are going to have access to us. And that's part of what I wrote, that we are not taking due cognizance of the changes so that our intellect is not matching the practical changes that we are looking at. Yes, we are going to have those problems. But just as with politics, as I tell people, modernity is the first self-correcting system that humanity has invented. As Trump is finding out, and the goons that follow him, so they elect you, and then they say, oops, what are we thinking? Then they toss you out. And you are not permitted to change the rules halfway so that you can remain there without going. So 4 years in the life of a country that is going to be around for a long time is a very short time. 2, because South Korean women too are no longer marrying, in fact, South Korea is now beginning to replicate Japan. So what I found out when I was there was that South Korean men were now going out to Indonesia, to Vietnam, to Cambodia, to Philippines to get wives. And then I caught a report in the newspaper when I was there, where the government was actually setting up a commission to study how to deal with those immigrant children who are being ostracized, because South Korea is a homogeneous society, who are being ostracized by their peers in primary schools. So the government already picked up on that problem, and they started putting in place institutions to help them study it before it becomes 18 years down the road, 20 years down the road. That is what knowledge does for you. So pretending that there's some past that you can hold on to that will shield you from all this, we already know that. I mean, the three of us are Yoruba. We're very urbanized people. So this is not something new to us. We've always found ways to ensure that, the urbanization did not completely destroy, but we know that how we organize in the urban spaces was not the same way that we organized in our small villages, that our parents came from. And again, Yoruba land is a very good example. Those villages had not been villages for a long time. I started primary school in Olodo, which used to be a train station. Olodo is almost part of Ibadan now. And how do you say you just have a village where you already have a railway station, where you have a cosmopolitan presence from all across the country working at the station? These are the challenges for us in terms of knowledge. What I don't want is for people to keep thinking that there's some past that they can hold on to that will serve them. No, not in any society. China is dealing with the same problem right now. Look at what happened in Hong Kong. So again, don't take Africa out of the global circuit of ideas. We've always been there. And it may help us to start figuring out how other people are solving those problems. And we learn from them. And if we come up with something new, they too can borrow from us and learn it. Does that make sense in some way?
Yeah.
So
Okay.
for me, knowledge is the key. So I'm not going to paper over the problems, but once you know that this is your problem, then you call your head. Sociology, psychology, the discipline. And by so doing, you also expand your educational market. You create more jobs. How many jobs would holding on to, quote unquote, our tradition do in an environment where you're producing so many graduates every year? What part of your economy will absorb all those energies? So again, there are practical consequences from all this. There are economic implications. So you expand your field of social work, you expand the capacity of people who can act as counselors, marriage counselors, child caregivers, speech therapists. We are human. Many of our children have speech impediments. What are we doing to ensure that, we have the knowledge and the solutions to those kids? Yeah. Again, it comes down to their dignity. Because once they know that, if you ever had a stutterer in your family, you know what that means in a society like ours. Akololo. Just think of it. And the impact on that person's personality. That's the level at which things literally eat me up. And where my optimism comes from is precisely that if we put the right tools in place, even if we don't solve them, we'll make better sense of them and ameliorate their consequences. And that will be good enough. And it will definitely be an improvement on where we are now.
I mean, one of the pleasures of talking to you, and I guess one of the pleasures of speaking to a philosopher, is that the answers are like onions. There are just so many layers that you can peel and reveal.
Because there are no simple issues. No. Life is messy. Thank you. You got that.
I mean, your point on modernity being self-correcting is so deep. For example, when you were talking about the US, I was making the point to someone that it seemed like the end of the world in January when Trump was sworn in. And a lot of people close to him, the power grabs or the business deals. And 2 years from now, if the electorate flip Congress really, really hard, subpoenas will start flying all over the place.
Thank you. As of today, this presidency is over. This presidency is over. You got that right. Look what happened a month ago with the governorship elections in Virginia and New Jersey. And various local elections, and Republicans were wiped out. Don't believe anything you read that is contrary to that. Down to school boards in Georgia, they were thrown off. It's not even 2 years. It's not even a year yet. People are tired. That's what I mean by, yes, he can then pull a Ouattara or a Museveni, and then find ways to make sure elections will not hold. That's not within his power.
Yeah. And to think that it will take the sheer force of force to truncate that system speaks to the phenomenon itself.
Thank you. That's the part that I want to educate our young people about. And for us to get a good grip on it. And my favorite country in Africa where that is concerned, Senegal. 3 times now, incumbents have tried to lengthen their tenures. 3 times the Senegalese people said, we love colonialism so much, so get the hell out. So I'm very proud of the Senegalese, And that's why Senegal is different from other French-speaking African countries. Because Senegal was a nodal point for modernity, before the French also bought into indirect rule, which they call association. The 4 communes continue to be the cornerstone of Senegalese education and democracy. And of course, we got Balewa, they got Senghor. Ìyàtọ̀ wà ńbẹ̀. We have never recovered from it.
Oh, that big.
We have never recovered from it.
So, I mean, you diagnose African continent as suffering from a philosophy of limits.
Yeah.
Where leaders and intellectuals alike rely on alibis, like it cannot be done, or attribute it to inscrutable fate. Or
Thank you.
again, this our lack of curiosity. I mean, you've connect the dots for me. It goes back to our education system.
Yeah.
Our lack of curiosity at explaining things, and worshiping gods of gaps.
Thank you.
It's perplexing. And then you contrast this with the modern culture of hope, where the future is an open book, open
Thank
to
you.
human tinkering. If, as you say, we have naturalized our poverty and backwardness, kadara and all that, I'm curious, what is the specific mechanism for dismantling this psychological fatalism that has really gotten a hold of us, our social psyche?
I have to confess to you, this one place where I have no optimism. I'm very sorry. I have no optimism. In order for you to rebuild, you first have to stop digging. Your African intellectuals and all the other top elements of our societies, they don't know how to stop. Every time you think they have reached the bottom, they find new depths to plumb, new depths of despair, of irresponsibility, of stupidity. Anybody who thinks that the military belongs in the future of anywhere in Africa is out of his or her mind. I didn't even know how low we have sunk. Now I know that they actually take Ashwebi for inaugural lectures. I didn't know that until 2 months ago or 3 months ago. Look at our universities. Look at who runs them. Meanwhile, when I first got back home in 86, and my students, many of them are still alive, I hope. At some point I told them, I said, we should shut down all our universities and have a reset and decide whether or not we want to have universities. A few months later, guess who said exactly the same thing? Wole Soyinka. And my students said, Malam, Prof just said, I said, now that Prof has said it, I hope you pay attention. Because we can't continue this way, but the universities as we have them right now, no, they cannot deliver anything for us. I can tell you that. That's what I mean by, I'm sorry. No, it's not going to happen. With the specific case of Nigeria, it's not just religion. 1997, I was in Nigeria. I was talking to one of my friends, classmates, colleague at Ife. And I said to him, for you to recover universities in Nigeria, you got to dissolve the NUC and you got to get rid of HASU. And I said to him, when the Minister of Education then, under Abacha, Lima Mohammed, said to the universities, to ASU, yes, go and negotiate with your governing councils and all that. I said, ASU's response ought to have been, yes, we agree with you, but that golden age you are talking about of universities working with their governing councils, there was no NUC back then either. NUC is a plague on university system. They have become so stupid. About 6 or 7 years ago, they authored a handbook for benchmark for master's degrees. They've just produced the one for PhDs. Given what we have been talking about, what role does that have to play in knowledge production? What role does that have to play in knowledge production? This Cornell where I am, there's a college here called Ithaca College. It's a teaching school, it's an undergraduate school. People in Ithaca College pray every day that Cornell will never come down from its pedestal. Because it is in Cornell standing up there and doing all the things that it does that Ithaca College gets the kind of quality teachers, that it wants. Is that what we have in Nigeria?
Certainly not.
How does anybody think that, Ibadan and Ife should be mentioned in the same breath as Covenant University? But that's the hole that we have dug ourselves into. I'm sorry, I can't be optimistic about that. Honestly, I think the continent makes it almost impossible for it to progress every day. And they all come down to freeing up the mental productive energies of your people. And that means almost no controls. You heard I said almost no controls. Because otherwise, if you take a place like China, the guys in the Communist Party know that they could not continue to run the country the way they were doing under party discipline and so on and so forth. So they gave their people the energy. They said, but don't ask about politics. As long as you leave political control out, you can do anything. See where China is now. That was the blueprint. Do we have that? When somebody approached me several years ago when they were going to set up their university to consider becoming the vice chancellor and all that. Yes, I did come. I visited the campus. I held meetings with the so-called board. I told my wife, I said, no. NUC is illegitimate. Some of us out here, we wrote something to that effect about 12 years ago. No paper in Nigeria agreed to publish it. Mm-hmm. NUC has no place in a federal system. It can only guide federal. So I asked my friend in 1997, I said, how do you set up a state university and put it under federal control? He said, Mumisi will Riembi, quote unquote. I want to feel like 1997 is still alive.
Wow.
He can confirm it. Quote unquote, he said, Mumisi will Riembi. We graduated the same day. So Amarawa. I said, how do you set up a state university and put it under federal control? Not to talk of private ones. Is that the way we think? So, when you have all these constraints that you are working under, in fact, they are the real optimists because they are the ones who think that, they can make gold out of this dross. They are the magicians. I am not. I'm too hard-headed, So this is not to say we lack capacity, to do it. But you need a framework. And that framework is not happening.
It wasn't so bad.
Oh yeah. And it's going to get worse.
Okay. This is still on the topic of modernism somewhat. Yeah. Now, you note that Nigeria, the continent's most populous nation, does not know roughly how many people inhabit its physical space. And you link this inability to count directly to the chaotic slumification of our cities. Personally, I've done a fair bit of work on Nigeria's census, but I found your argument that we experience numbers as a burden, quote unquote, rather than an asset for tax and planning. Very interesting. If a modern society lives or dies by counting, to sort of reference James C. Scott's eligible states and all that, does the resistance to accurate census taking in Nigeria stem merely from political corruption, or is it a deeper refusal to engage with the scientific orientation required to master our environment?
It's the second. It's not politics. It's the second. And I tell people now, when I wrote that chapter, by the way, I wrote that chapter in Korea. I didn't know what I was talking about in that chapter on counting. Okay? You know why I say that? As of today, I can write a 300-page book on counting, on that short chapter alone. So if I tell you that I knew what I was saying then, no, I didn't. I'll give you one of the ways to buttress why I said it's the second, not the first. This city, I call this city. Do you know the population of Ithaca, New York, where Cornell is? You want to take a wild guess? Any one of you?
30,000? 30,000?
Thank you. 30,000. Do you know how many tourists come to this area yearly? About 850,000. How many hotels? So when my cousin, several years ago, said, we want to do something and we want to put, a digital whatever in Ibadan, I said, should you help me? I said to him, you're a Rotarian. Can Ibadan host the World Rotary Convention? The answer is no. You know why? You don't even have enough hotel rooms. You can't handle the logistics of that number. Look at where they just held the COP Climate Summit in Brazil. It's a place called Belém. Never even heard of it before, in the Amazon. So in this small town of 30,000, all the surrounding areas and all that, I don't think they come up to 200,000. Do you know how many medical practices are here? Do you know how many lawyers' offices are here? Bookstores, restaurants, and all that. Now, this is where counting becomes crucial. All those who are running all those doctors' offices, dentist offices, and all that, they have to be able to price themselves in a way that would anticipate how many people will they be serving, how much will they be charging them, that will enable them not only to pay the salaries of the principal in the upper middle class range, but right down to hygienists, janitors, and all that, that will make it work for everybody. That is the magic of counting. Can you say that for Ibadan? Okay, so let me now go back to the person who wanted me to be vice chancellor. So when I went to the town, the person who was coordinating it, so we drove around the town and all that. So I said to him, what's the population of this town? He said, maybe about 20. I said, no. He said, you think it's more? I said, it should be about 40,000. So when we got home that night, he said, we'll ask Chief when we get home. So when we got home, so he said, Prof was asking, what's the population of this place and all that. Chief said, according to the last census, I think they put it between 40 and 45,000. The guy looked at me like, I said, no, I'm a poor philosophy teacher. But when I looked, just one bluff in that city, and I think of the households and so on and so forth. So I said to him, if I were to take this job, nobody working in this university will live in the city that is next to the place. I said, no, they will all live in this town. He said, but how are you going? I said, very good. I said, so we'll set up, Chief has the money, he has other people and all that. We set up a property corporation. We build houses that people can buy at subsidized rates or rent, and all that. I said, when people live here, then they are going to need entertainment. So they don't need to go to the city. So they get their money from our university, but they spend it elsewhere. I said, they would need restaurants of different levels. And I said, I will actually work with this city and ask to incorporate it as a city and then use that to sell bonds to put sewage system in the city. The guy looked at me. The guy I'm talking about, he's a businessman, he's in Michigan. He just came home to help his uncle. The university is ongoing and all that. So he looked at me, he said, where do you come from? And I told him, I said, is there any body of water that runs through this town or is very close by? He said, why are you asking? I said, well, if there is, I would like to go visit it because we can see what the elevation is and see whether we can dam it. You see what I mean about granular thinking? No, I'm not thinking of the state providing anything. I'm thinking of that university becoming the economic engine of that town. So when you hear college towns in the US, Ithaca is a college town. The economy of this town, and there are multi-million-dollar houses here. Make no mistake about it. So why does anybody think that we cannot do that for money here? Why? That's what I mean by the poverty of imagination. But you have to free money here from being part of some useless local government and have it incorporated as a city. So it can raise its own money, institute property taxes. But you need a very good judiciary so that if anybody makes monkey business with that money, they'll be roasting in jail.
Yeah.
You see how all these things are connected?
Yeah.
Did I address your question, Faye?
Yes, definitely.
Yeah. Again, you see what I mean by the individualism is not just for people, it's also at the granular level, it's a metaphysics of separation. And then you start negotiating how you are going to form a group. You don't think that the group is natural, it's just there. You got to curate it. That's what I'm saying.
That point is so deep that if a CEO had said it, it would be plastered all over social media. Millions of dollars, even billions of dollars have been invested in Nigeria based on poor projections.
Thank you.
And
Yeah.
About the size of the market, we don't know how much we have. We don't know the income of the population, who earns what. Nobody knows.
Thank you. And without those numbers, you are dead in the modern age.
Yeah.
That's why I said, how would you decide to come and put a medical practice here if it is not going to give you a middle-class lifestyle as a medical doctor? And if you look at the population and say, okay, what do they earn? Because those are the things that will figure into your pricing. Otherwise, you price yourself. These were not things that were in my head when I was writing that chapter. These are things that I've started thinking about ever since. And I'm saying to myself, oops, wow. Just think how different that chapter would be if I were to write it now, given what I'm saying to you. So all the examples of Amon rice and all that, they are very granular. To go back to your point about how do we explain it, even your professors are not invested in this. You know how hard they resisted creating that pension fund that their pension would be going into. They're all very happy now because they're getting fat checks, because of that pension thing. But then they will turn around and say, oh, this Western, come on, what part of a susu would you have used for that? I'm just asking. And I'm a very good Yoruba man. Don't make any mistake about it.
I mean, we've covered a lot. We've asked you so many things. But I would just like to close on this note. One of the things that, and I think I also expressed that in one of our recent episodes that I did with Faye, Africa needs, and in the case of Nigeria specifically, needs an intellectual revolution first. I have a strong feeling that is the starting point. A lot of the bad ideas really, really have to be uprooted. Tigbungbu. I want to know what you think about that and what that could look like in practice, especially for people like us who are cultural and social entrepreneurs who take ideas and, try to spread it. And finally, as a teacher, as a philosopher, what thoughts would you like to leave us with? Those are my final questions.
Two things. We need NGOs of the kind that enabled India to become intellectual leader in the world. We don't have any. There's one now that I don't know how deep it is and all that. The one that calls itself the Center for the Promotion of Private Enterprise, led by one Muda Yusuf, We need outfits like that actually make it their business to study how the global economy works. And it's not driven by identity considerations. And then seeing how that can be made to work for us. A friend of mine recently thought of, but that's not going to happen, to set up almost an institute for the study of modernity in Africa. Because you need these ideas to become part of common discussions, to have conferences, seminars, and all that, and have arguments about them. It's not a business of conversion. I tell people, I don't want disciples. My students know that. I tell them, no, I don't want disciples. You know why? You know what happened to the one who had them? No, not me. So, on your last point, this is what I tell my students. I said it again to them yesterday. Their education with me is an education in disrespect. And that disrespect should start with me. I encourage my students, anything I say to you in this class, fact check it. Don't believe anything I tell you, otherwise I will sell you something that you're going to regret buying from me. And if you come to me to push back, no, you are not being rude. You are not questioning my authority. We will have a conversation about it so that I'll be able to persuade you of how much sense that makes. Notice I said persuade. I'm not in the business of convincing you. And if the only thing you can say at the end is, I see where you're coming from, I still disagree with you, but maybe I need to take another look. My job is done.
Yep.
That's it. And if we have that attitude, just think of how much we are going to do about moving along our culture at all levels and encouraging our young to use their imagination to think of all kinds of different ways of understanding what they have been handed as their inheritance. And never be afraid of going outside of that inheritance to see how other humanity has done things and see what they can learn from them. And never apologize for learning from others.
Yes.
That's all I can say.
Thank you very much. It's been a real pleasure, a real mind-opening and mind-bending conversation, which is sort of like, the kind of thing that we really need. Like you said, useless knowledge, but, if it's not there, we become rich when we're able to do things like this. So thank you very much. And I hope our listeners as well will really take a lot away from this. We'll link to as many of your works as possible. A couple of years ago, I visited Japan for the first time. And before I went, I read a book called To Stand with the Nations of the World by a guy called Mark Ravena. And he obviously covered the Meiji Restoration. But one of the things that I really found so fascinating was how Japanese philosophers and Japanese thinkers began to say, actually, there is no conflict between our tradition and modernity. Right? There's no conflict between our traditions and development, So I decided to twist and make all kinds of different arguments, which I found really, really, really fascinating to say, look, this is the way we need to go forward. We need to do this. So actually, rather than getting bogged down, we can reinterpret tradition and reinterpret it for a modern society. And I think, this is one of the things that we need to do. And I like that at the start of this week, you grounded this in the fact that there is no conflict between modernity and being African and Africa at all. So I think once we get that starting point, if we can make that argument convincingly, then from there, the future becomes open to endless tinkering or open to manipulation, like you said.
Thank you.
So thank you once again. It's been a pleasure. And hopefully, maybe in the future, we'll have another conversation again and we'll see how it goes.
No, let me thank you both for reaching out to me. I'm grateful that I said yes to you. Really enjoyed my conversation with you. And I definitely look forward to future conversations, But I really, really thank you for your interest in my work and your very, very deep and sensitive reading of the junk that I have written. I know how much time that would have taken you to be able to do that. And I'm glad that you didn't think that I wasted your time that you spent on me. So, thank you very much.
Thank you so much. It was a real pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good luck with everything.
And you too.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.